Arms, please secure the doors. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President?
All right, this morning we are very honored to have the Reverend Matthew Hannesian of the St. Martin in the Field Episcopal Church in Severna Park, Maryland, guest of the distinguished senator from District 33. Please rise for the invocation.
Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, as we gather today, we give you thanks for the day that you have made and for the work that you have given us to do. We ask you to send down the spirit of wisdom, charity, and justice upon all who serve in this Senate, that with steadfast purpose they may faithfully serve the great state of Maryland. Give them courage, wise and discerning hearts, and the foresight to provide for the needs of all. Help them to listen first, to question often, and in their deliberations to put first the well-being of those who call Maryland home. We lift up to you and we ask your blessing on all those who are battling the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially for the healing of those who are infected. Let your arms of grace and loving kindness surround them and all those they love. Lord God, we ask your wisdom to come down upon our fellow citizens, that we may each accept the responsibilities we have to and for one another, and for our collective safety, health, and prosperity. Guide us to choose right actions that help ensure our well-being, and not just our own well-being, but that of our fellow citizens, especially in this time of pandemic. Finally, we ask your blessings on the proceedings this day, that wise counsel may be had, truth spoken and heard, and that your will be done for the betterment of all. With thankful and full hearts, in your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd District.
Thank you, Mr. President. The good Reverend has been with us 5 years in a row. He has done great things at his church in Severna Park, including the expansion of his local elementary school at his church. So I would move that the prayer be journalized.
Without objection, the prayer most certainly will be journalized. We thank you, Senator, for inviting the Reverend to join us today. Has everyone recorded their presence in the chamber? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 45 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now in session. Senators, we have a very important day, but a logistically complicated day today, and we are waiting for the test result for one final senator. So, if we get to a point where we are voting on on one of the bills, we may delay it to get to the next one, so that we can make sure that the senator has the ability to participate as we're waiting for the vote. So, with that, let's start with any announcements. Any announcements? No. I believe we have one. Do we have a resolution today? Yes, Chair recognizes the senator from District 30.
Thank you, Mr. President. As rising as chair of the Anne Arundel County Senate delegation, we are meeting at 1 p.m. on Monday the 15th to discuss one bill and a number of other county issues. Thank you, senators.
Yes, Chair recognizes the co-chair of the Protocol Committee.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 25th anniversary of the Maryland Rural Council. And for those of you who were here with me 25 years ago, this started out as the Maryland Rural Forum. After about 10 years, we weren't sure if it was going to continue in existence. But today it is more robust than ever as it interfaces with our regional councils, focusing on agribusiness, entrepreneurship, and business and economic development for the rural areas, and has been a champion for rural broadband. So I would just move have the reading of the resolution, please.
Clerk will read the resolution.
Be it hereby known to all that the Senate of Maryland offers its sincerest congratulations to Rural Maryland Council in recognition of the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Rural Maryland Council. Your combined efforts in the dedication in improving the quality, preserving the rural area of Maryland are commendable. Congratulations.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll. Has everyone recorded their vote? If so, the clerk will take the call. With unanimous support, the Senate of Maryland celebrates the 25th anniversary of Rural Maryland Council for its incredible efforts to improve the quality and preserving the rural areas of Maryland. We thank them for their service. Thank you, Rural Maryland Council. Hopefully watching virtually to have been celebrated. All right, let's go ahead and get going. We have all our tests are complete, so it looks like we do have everybody here. Let's get the administrative stuff out of the way. We have some bill introductions. The clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 929, Senator Reedy, Status of Emergency and Catastrophic Health Emergencies Renewals, Authorization by the Legislative Policy Committee.
Majority Leader moves so be considered the reading of the bills. Next, we have some legislative bond initiatives. This is calendar 15. The clerk will read the first bill.
Senator Peters, Foundation for Arts, Music, and Education. Senator Benson, Mission of Love Charities. Senator Kelly, St. Luke's Affordable House Project.
Majority Leader moves so be considered the reading of the bills. We have our first House bills today. First reading of House bills. Clerk will read the first bill.
House Bill 9, Delegate Sheedy, for Family Law Mandatory Reporter Training.
Majority Leader moves so be considered the reading of the bills. We have two announcements. We'll read each of them. The clerk will read the first announcement.
In accordance with Rule 33D, the following legislation has been reassigned as indicated below. Senate Bill 636, Senator Hayes, Housing and Community Development, Neighborhood Revitalization, Passive House Pilot Program, reassigned to Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
The announcement having been read is adopted. Clerk will read the next announcement.
In accordance with Rule 33D, the following legislation has been reassigned as indicated below. Senate Bill 883, Senator Gazzoni, Tobacco Tax, Out-of-State Sales of Premium Cigars and Pipe Tobacco, reassigned to Budget and Taxation and Finance.
All right, announcement having been read is adopted. Senators, we also need to waive the reading of the journal from the prior legislative day, so without objection, we'll do that. So I want to make sure that we walk through the next procedural steps here so that everybody is aware of what is happening. Today we're focused on the overrides. The bills are coming to us. These are all House bills that the House has overridden. So they are coming to us as messages, not as individual bills, but first we have to read the messages. And so what will happen is we will read each message and special order it. We'll go through all of the bills to special order. All of those will be put onto a single calendar. So they're special order to be on a single calendar as the bills themselves. We will do the executive nominations report so that the Secretary of the Senate's office has time to make sure that the computer is correct and we have a moment. And then we will take up a consent calendar. And then we will do the remaining bills that were not put on the consent calendar as individual messages one by one. So I want to make sure that everyone is very clear about what is a very complicated process. And if there's any questions or if there's any concerns, please don't hesitate to stand up and ask if there's something that doesn't appear to be in the correct logistical order. So let's go ahead and jump in. We'll start with the first message. The clerk will read the first message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 83, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Sigurd.
The message having been read is journalized. Do we have to have the bill up on the... No? Okay, so at the moment we have HB 83. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we special order this bill until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 86, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is now ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we special order House Bill 86 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 125, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we special order House Bill 125 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 498, 2020. Bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read, the message is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we special order House Bill 498 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 514, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 514 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 737, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 737 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1000, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 1000 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1095, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 1095 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1121, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 1121 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1236, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 1236 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1336, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 1336 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1488, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 1488 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1659, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seagull.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we special order House Bill 1659 until later today.
Without objection, so ordered. All right, so we've gotten through the messages, but for the ones that are left off that we would take up one by one. So we'll read those messages one by one All of the ones that we just read, now having been special ordered, will be on their own special order calendar as a consent calendar. So, all good? More or less? All right. Then let's do this. We're going to take up the executive nominations report so we can give the Secretary of the Senate just a moment to correlate everything and make sure the electrons are all in the right spot. So if the clerk could please read the report.
Executive nominations report number 2. Report of the Committee on Executive Nominations. Question is, will the Senate advise and consent to the nominations of the executive?
Chair recognizes the chair of the Executive Nominations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move favorable on the gubernatorial appointments in report number 2 of the Senate Executive Nominating Committee.
Chair has moved favorable. Chair recognizes the senator from District 8.
Yes, thank you. I would like to pull out executive nominee 13.
Number 13, a request to separate 13. Without objection, the number 13 will be removed from the whole report. All right. So let's take, are there any other names on the report that senators wish to pull off? If not, let's take up the full report absent nominee 13. The question before the body is, will the Senate advise and consent to the nominations of the chief executive? The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, the Senate advises and consents affirmatively to the nominations of the chief executive. The clerk will read the next nomination.
okay. Edward J. Casemeyer, District 12, member of the Maryland Community Health Resources Commission, appointed to serve remainder of a term of 4 years from July 1st to 2018.
Senator from District 8 has some sincere concerns, apparently, about the nominee 13. Our former colleague. Any discussion on the wonderful former chairman of the Budget and Taxation Committee? Chair recognizes Senator from District 8.
I would just like to say the committee will be much better off than it's ever been when we have Senator Ed Casemeyer, our beloved friend. Thanks, Ed, for doing it.
Well said. Thank you, Senator. All right, any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 46 votes in the affirmative, the Senate advises and consents affirmatively to the nomination of former Senator Edward Casemeyer as an appointment. Congratulations, Senator. All right. Madam Secretary, how are we ready for next set? Excellent. Okay, we have now a new special order calendar. The clerk will read the calendar.
House Bill 83, Delegate Moon, criminal procedure, charge of possession of marijuana, removal from case search.
All right. Apologies, Senators. We thought we were going to go to the overrides. We do need just a little bit more time, so we do have some. Oh, let's go. Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that the bills that we held over special ordered, that we take all of those as a consent calendar.
Thank you, Senator. So the Senator has moved, the majority leader has moved to take all of the bills on this consent calendar and put all of the bills on this calendar and put them as a consent calendar. Are there any objections to the Senator's motion? Chair recognizes the Senator from District 42.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to save out of the consent calendar House Bill 1658.
Great news, Senator. It is not that we have not read that message yet, so we were able to pull that one off. So that one is not a part of this current calendar.
Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, without objection, the calendar will be made a consent. We are now before the body. The question is, as a consent calendar for all bills, A green vote would override the governor's veto. A red vote would sustain the governor's veto. So the question before the body is, shall the bill pass notwithstanding the objections of the governor? Any discussion before we take the vote? Everyone is clear? All right. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 31 votes in the affirmative, the bills on consent calendar number 11 shall pass, notwithstanding the objections of the governor, and the veto is overridden. The clerk will read the next message.
ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1658, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seeger.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Up, Senators, strike that. Strike that. We have to read a message to the House about our actions. The clerk will read the message on the veto overrides.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House of Delegates, the Senate of Maryland has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 83, 86, 125, 498, 514, 737, 1000, 1095, 1121, 1236, 1336, 1488, 1659. Said bills are returned to the House herewith having been enacted under Article 2, Section 17 of the Constitution of Maryland by order Nicole Alexander.
Message to the House having been read is ordered adopted, or is now adopted. The clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1658, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seeger, Chief Clerk.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Senators, the question before the body is, shall HB 1658, shall it pass notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive? A green vote will override the governor's veto. A red vote will be to sustain. Any discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the affirmative, the governor's veto is overridden. The clerk will read the message.
by the Majority Leader, ladies and gentlemen of the House of Delegates, the Senate of Maryland has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1658, 2020. Said bill is returned to the House herewith having been enacted under Article 2, Section 17 of the Constitution of Maryland by order Nicole M. Alexander.
Message having been read is adopted. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 4, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seeger.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Question before the body is, shall HB 4, shall it pass notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive? A green vote will override the governor's veto. A red vote will sustain. Any discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 30 votes in the affirmative, HB 4's veto is now overridden. Clerk will read the message.
by the Majority Leader, ladies and gentlemen of the House of Delegates, the Senate of Maryland has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 4, 2020. Said bill is returned to the House herewith, having been enacted under Article 2, Section 17 of the Constitution of Maryland by order Nicole M. Alexander.
Message having been read is now adopted. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1300, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seeger, Chief Clerk.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. The question before the body is, shall HB 1300, shall it pass notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive? Any discussion? Yes. Chair recognizes Senator from District 5.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President and colleagues, in March of 2020, the General Assembly passed HB 1300, this bill we have before us. It commits Maryland's taxpayers to close to $40 billion in new spending over the next decade when you factor in the local contributions. That's on top of billions each year that we already spend on K through 12 education. I went back and looked. In fiscal year 2019, by my calculation, we spent roughly $7.5 billion, and in fiscal year 2020, we went to over $8 billion. Now, when we debated this bill and discussed it back in March, I had serious concerns about our fiscal situation anyway, committing to this kind of spending even before the COVID-19 pandemic took hold or as it was just beginning. But now I'm obviously even more concerned, and I hope you share my concern. I know you do. I hope you do. Right after we passed this bill here, which, by the way, the committees of jurisdiction, the House amended the bill heavily, and the committees of jurisdiction I do not sit on, but I remember and went back and checked, the committees of jurisdiction got very little time to go through the amendments to this bill, which were extensive from the House of Delegates. COVID-19 dramatically altered education in our state and around the country. I hope not permanently, but certainly it has altered it significantly right now, and it will reverberate for a long time. We've all felt that, whether you're a parent or a grandparent, whether you're a student or a teacher. So, in addition to the massive and unsustainable cost of up to $40 billion in new spending over the next decade, Quorum is now also an outdated document, created in a pre-COVID world. There's nothing in the 235 pages of this bill that address what we've seen from virtual learning, the positives and a lot of negatives that have been brought about by virtual learning. There's nothing about broadband connectivity, which is a huge issue in my community, in my district, and I know in many of yours. There's no real mention of tutoring to catch up students that are behind. There's nothing that addresses, how could it have, the increased role that parents and caregivers have had to play in their children's education. But beyond that, there's really an even greater and more significant problem with this bill and with this entire measure. Our current education system in Maryland is failing. I would actually say it's falling short of expectations. The words failing are not my words. The Quorum Commission has said our system is failing to provide a world-class education. It's falling short. Certainly in parts of our state, it's falling well short, and I would argue failing. Some parts of our state are doing better than others, but clearly we are not meeting expectations according to the Quorum Commission. But nowhere in all the discussions of the Quorum Commission's report or in any of the 235 pages in the final bill, nowhere in all the billions upon billions more that we will be spending if we override the governor's veto, has anyone really laid out clear, tangible metrics of student achievement that will define whether this endeavor for the next 10 years is successful or not. I put it this way, no one has been able to say what will define success as it relates to student achievement. Oh, there's measurements about how we're going to spend the money, and there's measurements about the human resource side of people moving into the system and the teaching profession. And not all of those discussions are bad, certainly. But there is no measure of success. How do I know in 3 years? How do we know in 3 years or 4 years that the massive surge of spending that's in this bill is working or falling short and we need to make adjustments? How do we know that? The solution to a failing system that's been put forward in this bill basically adds $40 billion on top of a current structure with some shifting, but basically the same current structure that the Quorum Commission itself says is not working at least as well as it should, and the word failure was used. So the title of the bill includes the word blueprint, and I've had people people contacting me to say to vote for the blueprint. But a blueprint should give you metrics, exact metrics and measurements. How big a room will be, how big a room of a house will be, or where the plumbing is going to go, what type of windows will be in the house. If I commission someone to build a house for me and I approved a blueprint, I'd be able to visit the site during the construction and say, hey, wait a minute, this basement seems like it's 2/3 the size of what it's supposed to be, or that plumbing that you're putting in is not up to spec. So this isn't really a blueprint. It's called a blueprint, but really it's a $40 billion statement of aspiration. And a lot of the aspirations are good, by the way, but it's a statement of aspiration. So taxpayers are owed real accountability on the return for their investment. Taxpayers, parents, students are owed the truth about where things should stand, that the goals, that where we should stand at the end of this, and progress reports and adjustments throughout based on the results of student achievement, not just how well we're spending the money or how good we feel about the system, right? Those things matter too, but student achievement, real measurable goals, is what should be in a major investment like this. So the good news is, since I've given you some bad news, in my opinion, the good news is we all agree that we want to improve education, and I think pretty much everybody in this chamber would support targeted investments, targeted increases in spending even, that if they're aimed at yielding real tangible results. So we can use this veto actually as an opportunity to pause and recalibrate the system that we are setting up with this. I'd encourage you to join me in sustaining Governor Hogan's veto, because I think his administration will work with us as well to say, hey, let's look at things we can do, but let's not push through something that will endanger our state's budget for 10 years without real measurable goals that we expect to achieve and can hold our system accountable to. We don't want another situation like Thornton where we invested record amounts of education spending, but if you look at scores, if you look at achievement, there really was not any positive change over the course of those. It was more than 10 years because we didn't revisit the formulas for a long time. There was, in fact, in some cases, things didn't get better. They got a little worse or they stayed the same. So we should sustain Governor Hogan's veto, and we can work together to address these problems and pass meaningful, results-driven education reform. Mr. President, I ask the body to join me in sustaining the governor's veto, and let's get to work on really achieving real reform. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the floor leader, the Chairman of Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you very much. We debated this 10 months ago on the floor. Since then, we obviously have had the COVID virus and infection, which has had an effect on our whole state, our whole country, our globe, across the globe. Let me talk about two things that happened prior to COVID entering our lingo and our language. The private sector would come to us, and I remember a meeting with one myself with the building sector, who said, we've got plenty of jobs, and this is pre-COVID. The one problem was we didn't have people to fill the jobs. They were not adequately trained or educated to fill the jobs. That's exactly what this individual told me when I met him in Riverdale Park, Maryland, about a year before COVID hit. Also before COVID hit, for 3 years, 25 people met regularly, many hours a month. And here was the methodology, and I'm not a scientist and the science method, but the methodology we followed was as follows. One, to find out where did Maryland sit nationally and internationally. And they looked at outcomes, not investment, but outcomes. Internationally recognized and nationally recognized assessments. And internationally, and you've heard this before, the United States came in the middle of the pack of the industrialized nations, middle of the pack. And this is a pack 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we led. Then we looked within the United States, and in terms of outcomes, using NAEP, internationally it was the PISA assessment, we found that Maryland ranked in the middle of the pack. Even though Ed Week called us number one for a number of years, it was not based on outcomes. It was based on investments. We were in the middle of the pack. So how did we go about trying to solve this problem? We selected the most successful nations in the world and the most successful states and looked at their practices. We took best practices, ones that were working well and getting great results across the globe. And then we took those best practices and tried to figure out how they would fit for Maryland. But we added some things. We added some lenses. We added social justice and the effect on minorities and discrimination. And we added other particularities of Maryland, from the rural areas to the suburban areas to the urban areas, understanding where they've been successful, where they've had challenges. And one thing we learned was that all of our students could benefit from a revamping, a transforming of our schools. Not just Baltimore City or Prince George's, which are the first two that always come to mind, but Garrett County, Dorchester County, Harford County, and I can name the other 21 as well. And that's the lens and the methodology this commission used, and took 3 years to do it. I'm not going to get into all the details of what was included in it. I'm just going to mention 4 or 5 or 6 quickly. It expands early childhood education. It works to improve teacher quality, teacher preparation in the colleges, entrance into the profession, higher pay, advanced opportunities based on performance, not just based on degrees, additional time for collaboration, and for young students, particularly those behind and coming from challenging situations, a strong foundation and the resources needed to succeed. For example, tutoring in K-3. The bill recognizes the whole child, understands social and physical needs as well as their instructional needs. We set up community schools, wraparound services. We also call for a more challenging curriculum and higher expectations and standards. We do a major transformation of career technology education, which was woeful when we assessed it across our state. While it was working successfully in isolated areas, systemically it was not doing what we needed to do in the state of Maryland. And finally, and this is very important, was accountability. We understand you simply don't throw money at a problem. There's got to be accountability. We believe these were best practices and that the implementation of those best practices was what conditioned receiving money. You don't just spend money and do it willy-nilly, but you had to, with real efficacy, implement these recommendations of the panel, and there'd be accountability. And if they weren't done, there would be warnings and concerns, and then money would be held back until you got it right. So, let me just be brief. I don't want to spend, we have a lot more work to do. And I've used this quote before from a former superintendent in Montgomery County. He talked about raising the bar for everybody, but at the same time, closing the gap. This is not just closing the gap and keeping people at the status quo, nor was it raising the bar and ignoring the gap. It's doing two things. It's raising the bar for all students, at the same time closing the gap for those who have fallen behind or been left behind. So I would say this in closing. From Baltimore to Beltsville, from Emmitsburg to Easton, from Hagerstown to Havre de Grace, and finally, I'd say from Potomac to Pikesville, and I put in Potomac, which is a very upper middle class area, they will benefit from this bill. And I believe all of your constituents, all of your families, and all of your children will see the benefit of this bill, because that is its purpose, to benefit all students. I urge you to vote green and override the governor's veto.
Thank you, Senator. Any further senators wish to speak?
Mr. President.
Yes, Chair recognizes Senator from the Lower Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. President. My colleagues, I rise in support to sustain the governor's veto of the blueprint for Maryland's future. We have a blueprint costing nearly $40 billion over 10 years, a Kerwin plan that we simply cannot afford, especially in the midst of an international health pandemic, which does not provide local flexibility and control, which is especially needed during this COVID-19 crisis. My colleagues, as way of background, I personally attended many of the Kerwin meetings throughout 2018 and 2019 on my own before I was a late appointee to the Kerwin Commission in the spring of 2019. I want you to know that I made that extra effort as I realized the importance of the charge of the Kerwin Commission to review and recommend any needed changes to the education funding formula and to make policy recommendations that would enable Maryland's pre-K through 12 system to perform at the level of the best performing systems in the world. During this 3-year process from the 2018 and the 2019 meetings to passing the 235-page bill before an early March adjournment due to COVID, I was consistent in raising the need for affordability, for prioritization, for fair funding formulas, for local flexibility, and for the improvement of the classroom environment. The governor vetoed the blueprint for Maryland's future during an unprecedented global pandemic where revenue projections were a $2.8 billion drop. Although revenue projections are better than projected in March, our current revenue estimates are still $900 million less than March over 2 fiscal years. And quite frankly, too many Maryland individuals and small businesses are still struggling as we work on their COVID-19 relief package and help our constituents through the COVID-19 recovery. Now is not the time to go forward with a nearly $40 billion spending bill with tax increases tied to it. Marylanders could not afford this in good times, and certainly right now as we work together to pass an emergency COVID relief bill and on towards long-term COVID-19 recovery. A public opinion survey commissioned by the Maryland Public Policy Institute found that 72% of Marylanders statewide say policymakers should focus on reallocating resources more efficiently and effectively instead of increasing the education budget. And my friends, that view is shared by Democrats, 66%, Independents, 80%, and Republicans, 81%. Last March, this body had an extended debate on the trigger as a fiscal safeguard. We were told by the supporters of the Kerwin bill that we could pass Kerwin now during a global pandemic because the trigger was added. The language in the bill states, beginning this December and every December after, if December Board of Revenue estimates are more than 7.5% below March Board of Revenue estimates, then it would halt formulas and additional funding to the rate of inflation. But even in the midst of a global pandemic, the trigger did not go into effect. Since March of 2020, my primary focus, as I'm sure all of yours, has been in assisting my constituents, your constituents, with both their immediate COVID-19 needs and with long-term recovery. Why would we pass the cost of Kerwin, a cost of $6,200 in tax hikes per Maryland family, on to our constituents, especially at a time when so many are struggling for their very survival? It really is unthinkable and outrageous. Our local jurisdictions already are taking a hard financial hit. They simply cannot afford the Kerwin bill. My county and local elected officials are in constant contact with me about how much COVID-19 has weakened the local economy and therefore has weakened local tax bases. Why would we put this heavy financial Kerwin burden on our local jurisdictions as they are struggling to recover from the negative fiscal impacts of COVID-19? Mr. President, my colleagues, I strongly believe our constituents expect us to balance the ideal with the possible when it comes to funding Maryland's education priorities, which means factoring in the reality of the significant state and local fiscal impacts, and quite frankly, balancing education and non-education priorities, especially during a global health pandemic. And for these reasons, I am urging my colleagues to join me in voting to sustain the governor's veto of the unaffordable blueprint for Maryland's future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. President. It seems like 10 years that we've been talking about this. It was actually my bill in the beginning to do the task force when we started talking about the delivery of education, how we are serving all of our kids. And I think the main reason that I have supported so greatly all the recommendations for the blueprint is that it is aimed at all of our kids, not just the ones that do well. It's aimed at all of our kids, and we knew we had to make some changes, I think, to how we deliver that education to make sure that those kids were brought along. And I think the blueprint does that. We've talked many times about no throwaway kids, and we have a lot of kids that just have a lot of needs, and I think COVID has really made those needs amplified even more. And then we talk about affording the blueprint. The first couple of years of it we already have paid for, and from what we can see, we've got a clear pathway to pay for what we want to do. And I think it's a good investment. I mean, what better investment can we have besides the education of our kids? So I would urge my colleagues to override this veto. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from Hartford in Baltimore County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I get up to support the governor's veto, and I do that as somebody who actually voted for this bill. You know, I remember last March when we debated this for the hours, and I sat up front there listening to it, and I truly was divided on what I was going to do. Me as a person, I changed when I had kids. You know, and it's when you become a parent, you do everything you can to take care of your kids and give them the best. And I sat there thinking I was a product of public education, and I wanted the best for my kids, and I want to make sure they have the best education, everybody's kid. So I voted for it. I would not have voted for it if it had not been the changes that this Senate made, because I can tell you the bill that came from the House, I did not like at all, and I would not have supported it. But I listened to what you guys said on the floor, the debate, I took it to heart, and I voted for it. It wasn't a popular vote in my district, trust me. But going home that night, I realized, you know what, I did what I thought was right. But since that time, education has changed. Let's be honest. You know, there was this tectonic shift in education last March. Nobody thought our kids would be out of school for more than a month. We're going on 10 months with kids not stepping foot in the classroom. As the senator from Carroll County mentioned, you've got virtual learning. We've got out in the rural areas, we have problems with broadband. Kids are actually having to go to their parents' work to be able to get online so they can go do their class. So to me, this bill has changed. The things that the floor leader had mentioned that they put in there were all great stuff. But when you look at the title of it, it's the blueprint. When you're going to build a building or build a house, you get a blueprint. And obviously you'll make changes along the way. And you put in change orders. But eventually you'll get to a point where if you put in too many change orders, you got to take that blueprint back to the drawing board and redo it. And I believe that's where we are with this bill today. Because education has changed over the last 10 months. And I think that there's enough of a change that we need to go back and look at this and address those changes. Because, you know, it is a different world out there for us right now. So for that reason, I'll be supporting the governor's veto.
Thank you, Senator. Chair, just a reminder, Senators, if you're interested in speaking, please remember to use the button so that it remains difficult to see. Chair recognizes Senator from District 30.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a bill that I campaigned on, a bill I was proud to work on with senators across this body. And it's been brought up a couple of times how different the world is from when we first voted on this 10 months ago. And I wasn't planning on speaking, Mr. President, but I received an email from a teacher in my district just this week. And she gave the correct context that I would like to think about this bill in. Megan, who teaches at Lothian Elementary School, wrote to me, "I want to take you back about a year ago to Read Across America Day at Lothian Elementary School. Thank you for volunteering, and I know many of us spent that probably one of our last public events when we could at Read Across America Days across the state." Megan writes, "We had no idea that the events of that week would be our last large-scale event together for many months and probably many more. That makes your visit all the more special. Before you walked out that day, you asked me if there was anything you should be aware of as you represent my school community and my home community. We discussed the 2019 legislation that mandates a universal dyslexia screener in response to the results. I mentioned that we really needed better staffing to support our learners as I anticipated a large number of students needing supplementary reading instruction. At that time, I anticipated that we would have 40 to 60% of our kindergartners and first grade students needing supplemental reading instruction based on historical data. The impact of this pandemic on the early literacy growth of my students is far above my pre-pandemic estimates. Approximately 85% of our kindergartners and first grade students require supplemental reading instruction. We are in the process of rolling out another rather detailed and creative plan for providing that supplementary reading instruction. Our plan is adequate and meets the legislative requirements. However, I beg you to support increasing funding to our schools." She goes on to say that this pandemic has highlighted the stark inequities in our communities. Black and brown communities and communities of poverty have been especially traumatized by the effects of pandemic living. This is our school community, and a better education would serve them well. We could do better with more staffing. I believe my students deserve better, and I hope you do too. The blueprint was designed to help us close these opportunity gaps that have impacted too many students and communities for too long. Please vote to override this veto so we can deliver the support to our students that they desperately need. Mr. President, I would argue that this is not throwing good money after bad. This is not increasing the education budget just to increase the education budget. These are targeted pots of money that we know are science-driven, are data-driven, are proven. Investing in early education, investing in breaking up concentrations of poverty, investing in special education, investing in making sure our educators are compensated the way they deserve. These are very targeted, specific policy proposals that we're discussing here today. And for that reason, Mr. President, and I want to thank Megan for writing to me today, I urge a green vote and an override of this veto.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from the 34th District, Harford County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, there's a lot of good stuff in this bill. A lot of these ideas that, the chairman expressed, my good friend from Montgomery County expressed, there's some nice notions in this bill. The problems in the implementation, and I'm not a soothsayer, but I'm sort of predicting that in fairly short order, the governor's veto is going to be overridden. So I really want to address what I think is a structural problem, which we're going to have to address in this bill. And that's the piece that we call the Accountability and Review Board. So what is that? It's sort of a Orwellian term. It's accountability and implementation. That's sort of like saying I'm the judge cop, I'm the legislative executive, or I'm the banker auditor. There's a famous picture of Babe Ruth pointing to center field. I think it's like 1932 World Series, and saying, "That's where I'm going to hit it," right? And then he hits it there. Well, he wasn't accounting for himself. That was his plan. He announces the plan, and a stadium packed with fans got to hold him accountable to it. And sure enough, it went there. But if Babe Ruth was an accountability and implementation board, he would have walked up to bat, driven the ball to somewhere in around shortstop, stood at the plate and pointed to where he just hit it and said, "There it is," right? You can't have the people who are accountability be the implementers, right? It doesn't work that way. So who are these guys? This Accountability Implementation Board. Well, it's an independent state board. That's what the statute says. Well, they're sure not independent of politics because they're appointed by a group of people nominated by the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and the Governor. So they're not independent of politics. We know that's for sure. So what's their job? They're supposed to implement the blueprint. I think we've made a fairly strong case over here so far today that it's not a blueprint. It's not a blueprint. Calling this a blueprint is like saying, I want you to build a 104-story skyscraper in Manhattan, full of offices, Art Deco style. Go for it. That's your blueprint for the Empire State Building. Notions, good notions, aspirational notions, don't make a blueprint. But that causes a real problem here because, and I want to, here's where we are right now. Here's the blueprint. I can give you some examples. It says, encourage high school students from each local school system to consider pursuing teacher's degrees or education degrees. Assist up to 50 qualifying schools to implement evidence-based literacy programs. Assist in providing adequate funding for early childhood education. Those are awesome notions. Those are aspirational notions. That's not a blueprint. And that creates a serious problem for us because that means there is no blueprint. And we've charged this AIB, I'll call it, the Accountability Implementation Board, we've charged them with developing a comprehensive implementation plan to implement the blueprint for Maryland's future, which shall include timeline for implementation, key milestones to be achieved by each county. So we got this board who's got a lot of power, and they're implementing a blueprint that doesn't exist. Okay, so that's a bit of a quandary for all of us now. They're controlling billions of dollars, and it's at their discretion. I call that policy making. But that doesn't exactly jive with, if you look at Education Article, Section 205, it says that the educational policy is supposed to be set by the independent State Board of Education and the superintendent. They're supposed to determine the educational policies. But how can those folks set the policies if they don't control, you get billions of dollars here, that they're not controlling the policies with regard to those expenditures? If notions, these aspirational notions, without funding would just be an illusion. So whatever the board thinks is just an illusion, the State Board of Education, because the AIB is actually holds the power here. And that creates our problem, and I think it's going to have to be addressed by this body at some point. So another aspect of this is that this AIB, they're taking power from the superintendent and the state board, but that's just the beginning. That's the beginning of all this, because they're also taking power from the county boards, the county councils, the county executives, and they're doing that because everybody has to create a plan that suits the AIB, and the AIB has total discretion. Your plan is not good enough. Your plan doesn't say what I want it to say. You got to submit your plan to them in response to their plan, their policies, their priorities, and then if you fail to do that, here's the real kicker. If you fail to please the masters in the AIB, they'll pull your funding. They can go right to the comptroller and pull your funding. Not to worry, though. Not to worry, because they are going to create an appeals process. They themselves are supposed to create a process that you can appeal their decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, this Orwellian structure just defies all the tenets of good governance. It combines the implementation and accountability in a single body. It serves both as the legislative policy function as well as the executive functions of implementation. It further politicizes education that's already reeling from excessive politicization. And it adds an additional layer of independent state agency on top of the existing independent school board. Folks, the secret to good education isn't really a secret. Just go ask any good teacher. Give them a fair wage and let them teach. This General Assembly is not supposed to be the State Board of Education, and neither is the AIB. In those state and county boards, if they're not doing a good job, if our State Board of Education is not doing a good job at setting policy, if the county boards of eds aren't setting good policy, the conclusion we should draw from that is we got the wrong people there. If we got the wrong people, let's change the manner in which we pick those people for the state and the county boards. Maybe that's our problem. If we're not getting dynamic people that come up with good plans and implement them, maybe we should change those policies. But what we shouldn't do is go around them and write education policies for them. We shouldn't go around them and create a new level of bureaucracy that assumes their powers. And we certainly don't need to go create another body of experts to advise them, right? Let's get the right people at the top and quit screwing around with this stuff. Colleagues, I think it's really important that we do sustain the governor's veto. Much as we have some great aspirational notions in this bill, some nice objectives there, some nice broad goals, we don't have a plan. We don't have a blueprint or anything close to a blueprint. And we've created this new body that's really going to be a mess for all of us to deal with for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of Budget and Taxation Committee, Senator from Howard County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple words about affordability and the budget, since it's been mentioned a number of times. I think you all know in budget tax we take a lot of pride in our work, and we try to do it in a bipartisan fashion as much as we can. I think you notice that we see a lot of bills come on this floor with a unanimous vote. It's because we work really hard, we take our job very seriously, and whether it's spending $1,000 or $1 billion, we consider every component of what we do to ensure that we're doing the best for the citizens of Maryland. Just this week, I was with a couple of my colleagues, and I was raising some agonizing questions, just in terms of detail. I kept bringing up this and that about funding sources and such. A wise member, wise colleague turned and said, you know, as it relates to the blueprint and Kerwin, we've really been thinking about this for years. We've been planning for this for years. Just like on the policy side, where the details of the plan were coming together, likewise, we were thinking, how are we going to afford this? First off, I think at a base level, we all knew that we had to afford it because it was the right thing to do. But how were we going to do it? And I can remember moments over the last several years where in conversations, in discussions, in actions, things like the passage of the Marketplace Facilitator Bill and dedicated the large portion of that to the blueprint. We carefully thought of ways to ensure the success of this plan over many years. And now we find ourselves in a place, even in the midst of the pandemic, where we find ourselves in a place where for 4 years now, straight, 4 years ahead of us, this is paid for. This plan is paid for. And you know what? We're going to take the same careful look at this every year to ensure it continues to keep being paid for, because that's the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing to do to back up the values that we care about so much. You know, as one sort of final comment about why I think we're headed in the right direction, let me say this. When the governor's budget came out several weeks ago, I said in some public comments, I think this is pretty good. And you know what? I've been looking at it closer and closer, and I think it's really good. And I'll tell you why one of the things that I think is really good about his budget. Because of the veto, he did not have to include any money for the blueprint in his plan, in his budget plan. And yet, he included $72 million for concentration of poverty grants, $75 million for teacher salary incentives. For tutoring, he included $174 million, which is $151 million more than last year. Sort of proof that you can take actions along the way to deal with the current situation. Mental health service coordinators, $2 million. Special education grants, $65 million. Pre-kindergarten supplemental grants, $53 million. Early education, $54 million. And it goes on. And the simple answer is that the governor, who did not have to include these in his budget, included it in the budget. He included largely everything that was required. I think he made a good decision. I think we should continue this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from District 6.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, I rise in today to join the governor, and I believe the people in sustaining this and veto to not be overridden. When this bill was passed, and remember, as I am a part of Budget and Tax, there's amendments in place, and the state experienced any serious financial issues that the state and locals would not go further and burden down and to have burdens in the state or the locals with this bill that costs several millions and billions of dollars. And guess what? We're right here now experiencing that serious financial burden called the coronavirus. And this bill, it lacks in some areas of accountability. And yes, you will hear a lot about accountability. However, this is a very serious issue. And I'll tell you, the current bill focuses on inputs, but not outputs. It focuses on inputs, which is making sure that the money is spent on the right programs. But this bill does not focus on the outputs, which is if a student's performance is improving. We cannot know if Quorum is successful if we do not know the metrics of how it is improving our students' performances. The taxpayers are being asked to make a $6 billion year investment. With an investment that big, the taxpayers have a right to know if the investment is working and if our students' performances is improving. This is not happening with this. We need to sustain the veto until we can resolve this pandemic and get back to solid financial stability and address the serious lack of the accountability of the students' performance. Otherwise, if we do not, and instead continue to go forward, we will put ourselves in the exact same place as we did with Thornton. And then we will end up with spending billions of dollars in education and no significant improvement in our students' outcomes. Senators, don't let this Thornton 2.0 please sustain the veto. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I first want to thank the chair and especially the chair for all the work he's put on this issue. I know he put his heart and soul in this, and my issue is with policy, not my colleague. So there was 235 pages. I could talk hours about the issues I have with this bill, but I won't put you through that. But I definitely want to hit some highlights. And just in clarification from the chair, I appreciate him acknowledging that our current education is based on outcomes and that we're at the middle of the pack and we don't have a world-class education today. Also about the accountability board, he mentioned the implementation of best practices. What he failed to mention was that there was no accountability of student performance. It's focused on implementation. And then he mentioned about raising the bar and closing the achievement gap. But unfortunately, there is no measure of how high to raise that bar. You know, just a little or a lot. And also, how much achievement gap are we going to improve on? And if you go back to Thornton, they made the promise of reducing the achievement gap. It was a nice promise, well intended, but actually we have seen over the years that gap has increased. So we need more than just words in this bill to ensure we actually get what we're requesting. So, back to my thoughts on this. Let me first remove one misnomer in this debate by stating Republicans wholeheartedly support a world-class education. We believe education is the single most important governmental resource that can help individuals and entire families reach their dreams. Over the past year, the press has summarized the primary opposition to Quorum as the $30 to $40 billion price tag and its associated tax increases. While that is a very important aspect, the fundamental question of this debate must be answered. Will this bill deliver on its promise to provide a world-class education? I will clearly lay out that the answer to that question is no. And we are just squabbling over who gets a payday with taxpayer monies with little or no guarantee of student improvement. Given all of Kerwin's promises circulating around Annapolis, it's amazing that the actual bill has no definition of what success is and no guarantees of delivering a world-class education. We hear a lot of promises, but there are no guarantees or requiring a measurable student performance improvement. This should give the public serious pause before investing $30 to $40 billion. Some of the things we're hearing. This is a historic moment for Maryland. We can now see on the horizon the potential for every child in Maryland, whether they live in East Baltimore, West Baltimore, or Tacoma Park, having the ability to attend a neighborhood school and having a high-quality education. We also hear, if we can do this, and I believe we can, we have guaranteed the children of our state the education they deserve. So this is the most significant thing I've ever done in my career, 19 years in Annapolis. It says, how can you continue to hold schools accountable for high standards if you have made the decision not to give them money and resources they need to reach them? It would be phenomenal. We could afford to do everything we need to do for our children. So to summarize the passionate claims and promises, this will be historic, most significant, guaranteed, high-quality education that will provide all the money needed to be able to hold schools accountable for high standards. While these sound like great quotes for the Quorum legislation, this is in fact for Quorum's predecessor, the Thornton Plan, which we all see didn't live up to its promises. So here we go again with Quorum's almost identical promises and public quotes. Therefore, I would like to discuss two main points. The first, the General Assembly's history of educational promises. Secondly, the General Assembly's failure to include real solutions that would deliver a world-class education. So let's review history for a moment. This is not the first time this body has asked the public to trust them to provide a world-class education. Back in the early 2000s, this body promised if we would just add $1 to $2 billion every year under the Thornton Commission's recommendation, known as the Bridge to Excellence, we would have a world-class education. So what did the experts say about that claim after it ran its course? The Quorum Commission evaluated those promises and determined that Thornton's Bridge to Excellence failed to deliver on its promises. Now those same advocates are more than doubling their request for $4 billion a year with their same tired, unfulfilled, and broken promises of a world-class education. They are again asking for the public's faith in their promises, but they provide no assurances or guarantees that they will deliver on this investment. If you paid for and were promised a Ferrari, you wouldn't settle for a mid-sized sedan. Likewise, we cannot afford to pay for a world-class education only to get more broken promises. Our taxpayers deserve better. Our students deserve better. We have seen key provisions of the Quorum's recommendation gutted by special interest lobbyists. As a result, Quorum is doomed to fail despite their well-intentioned but hollow promises. History has shown that promises alone get us nowhere. Simply put, the failure of Thornton's Bridge to Excellence is only exceeded in magnitude by Quorum's multi-billion-dollar bridge to nowhere. Republicans desperately want a world-class education for all Marylanders and are willing to invest in it. But Quorum is seriously flawed and ripe for more broken promises. Marylanders are also willing to invest in education when they know they'll receive the product that they have been promised. Unfortunately, the General Assembly has a track record of over-promising and under-delivering. Now let's review some of the solutions that Republicans proposed that would have helped make Quorum a model for obtaining a world-class education had they been accepted. First, provisions allowing teachers to maintain order in the classroom. Teachers and students simply want a teachable environment where students can learn effectively. When talking with teachers, the first thing they mention is a lack of control in their classrooms and how disruptive students were not being dealt with effectively in the school system. These new liberal ideas of encouraging disruptive students to remain in the classroom is a recipe for continued failure. This recommendation was rejected. The second solution, reduce class size. Under Quorum, one would think class sizes would decrease, but under Quorum, they increase the teacher-student ratio to 1:30 with their so-called super teachers. Under this plan, your child will have larger classrooms, and you can ask any parent or teacher, and they understand that smaller teacher-student ratios produce a better and learning environment. This recommendation was rejected. The third thing, giving parents and students educational choice. For decades, we have seen students stuck in failing school systems simply because of their zip code. Thornton didn't change it, and Quorum won't change it, no matter how many community school coordinators they add. Parents want educational choice for their children, but the advocates for this bill denied families educational choice. If we are serious about educational improvement, why would we want to keep students in failing systems year after year, decade after decade? This recommendation was rejected. The fourth, restoring Quorum's recommendation for teacher certification requirement. Quorum studied school systems across the world for 3 years, and one of the key pillars in achieving a world-class education was providing higher teacher pay while also requiring associated teacher certification. As Quorum was initially drafted, this requirement was included. But the teachers' union's special interests lobbied the majority party policymakers to strip this requirement and replace it with encourage teachers to get a teacher certification. With having 100% teacher certification as a key component of Quorum, the most successful states that have simply used encourage have only achieved 25%. So you drop down from 100 to 25%. To remove such a key component is surely set Quorum on a path of failure. So we offered an amendment on the floor last year to reinsert that requirement, which the House stripped out. On a party line vote, this recommendation, which was put forward by Quorum after 3 years of study, was rejected. The last solution was incorporating metrics on student performance. Whether in school, business, or life, everyone knows you just don't implement a plan and hope things work out. But that is exactly what House Bill 1300 does. We must have a method to verify if students are getting a better education and obtaining the promised world-class education. The so-called accountability board is to monitor the progress of implementing the plan, but has no monitoring of measurable student performance. If you simply implement a bad plan, it's still a bad plan. For example, the bill before us says, the board shall develop a comprehensive implementation plan, and the plan shall include a timeline of implementation with key plan milestones for the schools. We offered an amendment to actually provide measurements to gauge success promised to the public. By adding this amendment, this would have gone in the bill, which they rejected. The plan shall also include measurements for determining if the blueprint for Maryland's future is achieving expected outcomes, including 1, reducing the achievement gap, 2, academic performance, 3, and any other measurements the board determines are necessary. Sounds like pretty common sense? On party line, it was rejected. The schools didn't want real accountability and will end up just like Thornton, failing our students. All attempts to put real accountability measures of student performance in this bill were repeatedly rejected. So to wrap up, the Republicans have presented the following compelling reasons to sustain the governor's veto. First, despite all the promises, nothing in Quorum legislation defines what success is, nor does it provide a guarantee of delivering a world-class education. 2, the pandemic has revealed so many flaws with Quorum, we need to reject it. 3, this is the largest spending increase in Maryland history, and we will see massive tax increases. 4, Quorum creates a partisan implementation board under the guise of accountability whose primary focus is implementation, not student improvement. 5th, there are no measurable metrics or accountability in Quorum to demand student improvement. If you don't measure success, you are sure to miss it. We need accountability in student performance, not merely accountability that the plan was implemented. Remember, if you successfully implement a bad plan, it's still a bad plan. And finally, Quorum misses some of the most meaningful and life-impacting solutions offered by Republicans and the Commission itself, namely, not providing an environment for teachers to maintain order in the classroom, not providing smaller classrooms, not giving students educational choice in failing school systems, not requiring teacher certifications, and not incorporating accountability and metrics to ensure students' improvement. So in conclusion, entering adulthood, my dad would give me some advice. One piece of advice he gave me when making agreements, he said, "Son, get it in writing." Maryland is being promised a world-class education, but as my dad would say, it isn't worth anything unless it's in writing. We have plenty of verbal promises, winks, and nods, but there isn't a single guarantee of a world-class education written into this bill. The public is being asked to pay a $40 billion bill while only getting a return one-liner. I'm from government. Trust me. Nobody in their right mind would accept this. In fact, we're being asked to pass a flawed, bloated monstrosity that won't even guarantee in writing that our school system will be held accountable for not achieving student improvement. We have heard that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And Quorum is the most expensive poster child of a repeated failed policy. I ask that you vote to sustain the governor's veto.
Thank you. Senator Chair recognizes Chair of Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a few brief words. We've had a lot of discussion this morning. I'm not going to respond and re-debate this issue and respond to all the points the minority leader raised. But let me just make 2 points regarding his comments. Many of you sat through Quorum Commission meetings. You sat through the markup sessions, and you sat here on the floor. And I can tell you, while it's been pointed out the things we rejected, there were a number of points from the minority party that were accepted and endorsed and incorporated into the blueprint for Maryland's future. Secondly, and I only came into the Thornton Commission late, but I can tell you that over their deliberations, they spent a lot of time talking about formulas and money. I can tell you the Quorum Commission spent the majority of their 3 years on what are successful policies. And in fact, that was probably, in hindsight, which is 2020, a shortcoming of the Thornton Commission. That it did not come up with the policies and the directives for how the school systems could be even more successful. And so, coming up with policies which have to be implemented in a flexible fashion by the local jurisdictions with accountability, learned from Thornton. We are not replicating exactly what Thornton did, although it had a great influx of money and was very crucial to our state schools. But we're taking it to the next level, as kids are take it to the next level, they say. And I believe that's exactly what we've done in Thornton from the very beginning. It's not a willy-nilly idea. And there were suggestions and extensive debate from Republicans and Democrats, from state school board meetings. Checker Finn, a very conservative Republican who was on the state board, who had a very conservative think tank on education, was part of that conversation and added very important ideas. This is a framework, it is a blueprint, and it is workable. Finally, let me conclude. You know, a couple of speakers a little while ago talked about the pandemic and that we should put this aside because of the pandemic. We know the pandemic has horribly affected our whole society and our children. Many of you with your own children or grandchildren, many of you with your spouses. You all know it. You experience it every day. How hard it is. Kids cannot sit at a screen for 6 hours. It has been one of the most difficult times for our children, our families, and for education. And some students are drowning and some are treading water. Maybe at River Hill in Howard County, they're treading water. Maybe at Walt Whitman in western Montgomery County, they're treading water. But they're drowning in District Heights in Prince George's County, and they're drowning in West Baltimore. We have a responsibility to get them to shore so they're not drowning or treading water. But even if we get them to shore, when COVID is over, and it will be over, and we will come out the other side, we will be faced with the exact same situation we had before COVID. That Maryland is not in the lead, that we are middle of the pack, and we have severe challenges ahead of us. So while we have to address with the direct effect of COVID, and the governor has recognized that, he's had a hold harmless clause, he's put $150 million in for tutoring, and we applaud that. But the fact is, when we're on the other side of the COVID, we will be in the exact same situation. Do we want the status quo, or do we want to transform our schools? That's the question we are facing. And I would say to you that the action by the governor vetoing the blueprint for Maryland's future was an action that spoke to mediocrity. It spoke to mediocrity, not move forward or maybe a little here, a little there. But a vision, a plan, no. We're going to hold on to the status quo. We're going to hold on to Maryland being in the middle of the pack and falling behind internationally and hearing from employers they can't find people to fill their jobs. We believe in the vision. We were pleased. We were joined by some members of the minority party 10 months ago. I strongly, strongly encourage you to vote green and show that we will not be satisfied with mediocrity when it comes to our children.
Thank you, Senator. The question before the body is, shall the bill pass notwithstanding the objections of the chief executive? A green vote will override the governor's veto. A red vote will sustain. Any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? Chair, in explaining his vote 11 years ago, wasn't sure what I was getting into, but just knew that the state had more to do to ensure that every child and family could meet its God-given potential. Here we are 11 years later. This is the plan, I believe, that sets forth. Starting tomorrow, nothing is more important than implementing with fidelity, with accountability. It is the future of Maryland's economy that's at stake. The clerk will take the call. With 31 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 1300, the veto has been overridden. Clerk will read the message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House of Delegates, the Senate of Maryland has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 1300-2020. Said bill is returned to the House herewith, having been enacted under Article 2, Section 17 of the Constitution of Maryland by order Nicole M. Alexander.
Message having been read is adopted. Clerk will read the next message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 932-2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Sigurd.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. Question before the body is, shall House Bill 932 pass, notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive? Any discussion? Chair recognizes the Senator from Anne Arundel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to ask some questions about this bill. Could I ask a representative from Budget and Taxation to stand?
Will the Vice Chair, the floor leader, rise? Appears so. Senator may proceed.
With Thank pleasure. You very much. Hi, Senator.
I can see you.
It's been a year since we reviewed this particular bill, and I just have a couple of clarifying questions for the body to make sure we understand, because there's one about digital advertising, and I believe this is the one that has to do with digital downloads. Is that correct?
Basically, yes.
Yeah. There was a letter issued by Attorney General Frosch that addressed the constitutionality of the bill in regard to the state constitution. For the benefit of the body, could you just share with us a brief summary of that?
Very frankly, no.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Why don't you share with us what you're talking about?
Well, he said it was constitutional.
Yeah.
And the reason he said it was constitutional was because of a clause in the bill which said it bypasses the normal budgeting process. Is that right, Mr. Chairman? He shakes his head yes, more or less.
Keep going.
Okay. So there has been criticism of this particular bill because of the constitutionality. It seems to have been addressed by the Attorney General. But the other question that has come up is there's another issue called the Permanent Internet Tax Freedom Act, which is a federal issue. Could you share with the body how this bill does not violate that federal law?
Well, that's the view of the Attorney General as well. It does not violate the federal law. There is a federal law that has some narrow preemptions of state law. They've been litigated all over the United States. It's conceivable that someone might challenge this law. Anybody can go to court under any issue. That's a great thing about the American judicial system. But 28 states have laws taxing these kinds of downloads. So my guess is, just like people go to court all the time, but I have pretty good confidence in our judicial system.
Thank you, Senator. In the committee, when this bill was before you, was there any discussion about the infringement of First Amendment rights of speech?
Not that I recall. Senator Serafini and I, as you know, were sponsors of this legislation. And I don't recall any discussion of the First Amendment on this one. I recall that issue being raised on the other bill that we're going to talk about in a minute.
Okay, thank you.
This bill is scheduled to raise about how much money initially and over the next couple of years?
Basically 100 million, 150 million, something like that.
Okay. Now, the chairman just testified in the discussion about Kerwin that we don't need the money for 4 years. Where will this money be deposited if it's not needed for the Kerwin contributions?
Well, money that doesn't go into a special fund goes into the general fund. But I'm glad you raised that issue because I was very concerned about the concerns expressed by your colleagues about the financial situation of the state, the economic situation. Can we afford the investment in our kids' education? As the chairman of Budget and Tax said, we've already budgeted for the first 4 years of the current program. But you'll be pleased to know that this bill will actually raise additional money, which reduces the risk of a financial problem in paying for the current plan.
So you're sharing with the body that this money will be made available for other normal state expenditures during that time when it's not needed?
What doesn't go into the Education Trust Fund goes into the general fund.
So is there a schedule of how much goes into the trust fund? Or
well, that was the issue with the Attorney General's opinion, was whether we could designate where money went outside the budget bill. That was the issue you raised before.
Okay.
Senator, if the chair could interrupt you very quickly, we have a slight adjustment. We have an administrative challenge. We read the wrong message, the incorrect message. So I think that's why there was confusion as to which question. We were supposed to have the other message read. So I just want to make sure administratively we are correct. So we're going to pull this and we will read, if we could ask the clerk to read the message on House Bill 732, not 932.
Thank you, Mr.
Never
President.
mind.
Never mind. We'll be back.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the House of Delegates has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 732, 2020. Said bill is sent to you for your consideration by order Sylvia Seeger.
Message having been read is ordered journalized. We remain on House Bill 732. Chair recognizes the senator from Anne Arundel. No.
Mr. President.
Let's give us a second. Let's make sure we're on the right one. Okay. Chair recognizes the senator from 29th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, today I rise in support of sustaining the governor's veto on House Bill 732. I would like to speak specifically on the provisions of this bill that deal with raising taxes, raising the tobacco tax in our state. These increased tobacco taxes will have a significant detrimental effect on our small businesses during this time of economic recovery from the effects of the pandemic. At the same time, we are opening the door to raising a regressive tax, which would hurt those who are experiencing financial hardships the worst and discriminate against those who are trying to help to survive. Last session, even before the coronavirus, we heard from many of our small businesses, owners in our districts and throughout the state about how raising this tax would hurt their business. Many of us represent districts that border other states that either already have a lower tax or will have a lower tax as a result of this bill being enacted. We have been told that this tax, the intent is to stop the use of tobacco. We know that that doesn't work. Rather than that, in these areas, it will simply lead to more people going outside of Maryland to buy their tobacco products or people making purchases on the internet. It's easy to see how increasing this tax is far more likely to have effects of encouraging increased illicit purchases of tobacco products. During my time as a law enforcement officer, we saw just how robust the black market was when it came to these issues about illegal tobacco use and tobacco trafficking. As many of you are aware, the terrorist cell utilized money from illegal tobacco sales, which funded the first attack on the World Trade Center. Beyond this, we know that we cannot control the supply of these products in our state. Now, we already know, and we did it right here in this General Assembly, it is illegal in this state to sell tobacco products to anyone under the age of 21. Yet our schools still have a significant problem with students using tobacco. So much so that my local school system asked me to introduce a bill to curb possession of tobacco products in the schools. The point of this bill was not to punish students, but it was to ensure that our schools could stop these children from using these tobacco products and provide the students with the help that they need to prevent the detrimental health effects of smoking that affect them and affect all of us for the rest of our lives. This affects children of all race. Our children are acquiring and becoming addicted to these products, even though it's illegal. We're told that by raising this tax, increasing the price of tobacco, this will help curb its use. This view, however, ignores the fundamental nature of addiction. Any one of us who knows somebody that's been addicted, it doesn't matter how much that it costs, it doesn't matter how hard it is to get it. The addiction doesn't stop because the price gets too high. The higher cost will not serve as a deterrent. Our taxes in Maryland are too high in the best of times. Raising taxes in a pandemic, with so many of our fellow Marylanders hurting economically, particularly raising a tax that inflicts its greatest economic harm upon those people who are struggling the most, is something that I believe we just should not do. This is unfathomable to me that at this time we would even consider raising taxes on our small businesses, especially after working together as we did in a 47-0 vote last week to pass the Relief Act to help the same people who this tax is going to affect the most. Raising this tax will do nothing to address the health problems and what we have right now in this state. I ask you to join with me and vote to sustain the governor's veto, House Bill 732.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from District 30.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll take this back to another discussion I had in the classroom just last year. This time it was at South River High School. I met with a bunch of students who brought to me the greatest concern was that a number of their classmates had started juuling in the bathroom, in between classes. We have a pandemic on our hands when it comes to young people using electronic smoking devices. And right now, the state of Maryland treats those electronic smoking devices with only the 6% sales tax. Why I'm supporting this bill is because in a recent study by NIH found that 8th graders, 16.5% of 8th graders are now utilizing Juul and electronic smoking devices, at 30% of 10th graders and 35% of 12th graders. They weren't born addicted to nicotine. They are having easy access to it, in large part because of its inexpensive nature. We have Juuls that one pot of Juul contains just as much nicotine as an entire pack of cigarettes, and yet is only taxed at the 6% level. This bill takes into account those technological advances, takes into account innovation in the market, and tries to, through tax policy, to compensate for that, to try to dissuade people, particularly young people who are utilizing these electronic smoking devices to a much greater extent. It's trying to change behavior through this legislation. I want to thank the sponsor of the bill for bringing it up. We worked very hard to think about this holistically, from a nicotine perspective, from a tax weight perspective. And colleagues, I urge a green vote to override the governor's veto and support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any senators who wish to speak who have not yet spoken?
Mr. President.
Yes. Chair recognizes Senator from Carroll County.
Yeah, just real briefly on this bill, and I've confessed switching committees, I've learned even more than I got up and talked about this bill and questioned it last session. But I've actually learned a lot more in my time on the Finance Committee because we deal with these issues. I want to sustain the governor's veto. I don't support that. We're raising the cigarette tax to an almost comical level now, which is one thing that, I mean, one of my colleagues mentioned about us being in the middle of a pandemic and it hurting small business, which of course it does, but also this is like the people who can least afford to pay these higher taxes are the ones that's going to hurt the most. And I don't want anybody really to smoke. I don't think smoking is good for you. But we're also now jacking up taxes on all the vape products. And my colleague from Annapolis just mentioned how Juul has, is a very, very powerful product with a lot of nicotine. But, nicotine doesn't cause cancer, number one. It's not good for you. I'm not suggesting anybody go out and start using it, but it doesn't cause cancer, number one. But number two, not just Juul, but we're also in this bill having taxes going in on the open vape systems, which really are used as a way for people to get off of smoking cigarettes. So the whole bill is counterintuitive. In addition to being a very regressive tax, we're literally cutting off our nose to spite our face if our goal is, in part of this bill, because if our goal is to get people to quit smoking cigarettes and we're going to jack the taxes up on cigarettes, well, I don't agree with making the taxes even higher, but at least that makes some sense. But then you're now creating taxes and raising taxes on things that help people quit smoking cigarettes. So, the poor lower middle class person who's using a lot of their income, a lot of disposable income on smoking, which I again don't think is a good thing, but they're addicted to it. We're saying we're raising taxes on you because you shouldn't be smoking those dirty cigarettes. But okay, great, I'll try vaping to try to get off of smoking cigarettes. Oh, well, we're going to raise taxes on you there too. It's just, this is another thing that we should do without right now and come back focused on this. We even heard actually from the budget chairman that as far as the Quorum Commission funding, it sounds like the governor put a good bit of money in the budget already, so we don't even need to raise this tax right now. So I just wanted to jump up and say that. I think we need to think about what our policy choices say about us as it relates to the people that it will impact the most directly and hurt the most. So I would strongly support, ask my colleagues to support sustaining the governor's veto.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any senators who wish to speak who have not yet spoken? Chair recognizes the senator from the 38th District, Lower Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. President. My colleague from St. Mary's County reminded me of the point of those of us who represent districts where you have, in my district, District 38, Delaware is my north border and Virginia is my southern border. And I represent Ocean Pines, which just a couple miles away is the Delaware line. And this is just one example of the hundreds of emails that I receive. As a retiree on a fixed income in the state of Maryland, I implore you to vote against any tax increase. With the sales tax, the property tax, and the tax on our retirement income, we are strapped and can ill afford any increase in taxes. Taxes 2 miles from my house in Delaware are vastly less. I've been a Maryland resident for all of 66 years of my life, but if taxes are increased, I will be forced to flee Maryland and move 2 miles away where it is far more affordable. Please vote against increasing taxes and vote for a decrease on taxes. Hundreds of these emails coming in. And it was also pointed out how hard our small businesses have been hit again. And here we are. We had worked together on the COVID-19 emergency relief package, and I'm proud of our work together in a bipartisan way on that. But then today we turn around and we're going to increase taxes during the COVID-19 recovery. I urge my colleagues to sustain the governor's veto. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? If not, the Secretary. Yes, Chair recognizes the senator from Baltimore City.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to step up because I've also gotten a lot of calls in reference to subject matter. I've got a lot of calls in reference to the good that it's going to do for our young people, and I've got some calls in reference to some folks that may not always understand the implications of what's going to happen. But the most important thing that I think about is our young people. And I think about those young people that just want us to count them in. And I think about just this morning, Mr. President, I think about Tycandace Smith. And she talked about how so many people just count her out. And I think about the health implications for our young people. And I think about the good that it's going to do and the stats that it talk about when it goes in the right direction. But I also think about this education piece. And I looked at the neighborhood that that young lady was coming from. And then I got on the phone and I talked to our senators. And I said, look at all the obstacles that she was up against and still successful. But in the poetry that she gave at the end of it to lift us up, she recognized that everybody was counting her out. And she's going to do everything to count herself in, but also her peers. So when I look at House Bill 732, I know that we're doing the right thing, Mr. President. And I know that we're doing the right thing because we're counting our young people in. We're making the investment, we're thinking about the health impact, and we're making sure that we move in the right direction as a state of Maryland. I thank you again for House Bill 732 and hope that we get a favorable vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Madam Secretary, if you could please ring the bells. Question before the body is, shall the bill pass, notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive? A green vote. Oh, Chair recognizes the senator from 36. There we go. Upper Eastern Shore.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You know, I thought this was going to be the easy one. The Maryland General Assembly tries to tax big tech. Tech companies come back and say it's a tax on small businesses. The governor agrees and vetoes, and then we do some type of procedural motion, and the veto is sustained. But no, here we are. At a time when small businesses are fighting to survive during this COVID pandemic, we're having to stand up and protect small businesses from tax increases. This leads me to ask, when did Maryland small businesses become the enemy of the General Assembly? Since when did businesses in our communities, owned by our neighbors, parents of our kids' friends, become our enemy? Since when did the job creators, the people that have risked their savings, that have made every effort to keep workers employed throughout this pandemic so they can feed and care for their families, become our enemy? It's really sad. Once again, we have before us another creative bill targeting our small businesses. Only this one hurts small businesses in a way that I would have thought was imaginable, by taxing their advertising. Not their sales, not their profits, but their advertising. The means which businesses grow, the ways they reach new customers, the ways they show off new products and new services. This bill taxes the way businesses communicate with their customers. In all its wisdom, the Maryland General Assembly has contrived a way to force businesses to pay taxes for their online advertising. To further add insult, the bill says, we won't tax you if you advertise in newspapers. So go ahead, throw an ad on page B6 of the Baltimore Sun or page D9 of the Washington Post. We're sure that will reach your target market. Or maybe television. Out of the kindness, we leave that option open. A nice little 30-second spot on the Disney Channel will surely help you promote your home renovation services. Nope, this General Assembly chooses to hit Maryland businesses where it hurts the most. Targeted, cost-effective online advertising. And to inflict this pain, we are seeking to be the first state in the country to punish our mom and pop businesses for the absurd notion of wanting to advertise on Facebook or Google. That's right, the first in the country. Of course, it's questionable whether this bill is even constitutional, whether it preempts federal Internet Tax Freedom Act, or even violates U.S. commerce laws. But in our questioning of that last year, the Attorney General's office really stuck their neck out and said this bill is not clearly unconstitutional. Not clearly unconstitutional. Thank you for the AG's office for that. This type of advice makes it even more questionable whether this policy will survive years of litigation and whether Maryland will ever see a dime of revenue from the so-called digital ad tax. Now, I'm sure we'll continue to hear that this bill taxes big tech and not small businesses. Well, you know what? The real evidence that this bill will most definitely tax small businesses is right in front of us. On your laptop, you can check out Senate Bill 787. Somehow, with this bill, we're seeking to prohibit the pass-through of this tax. But really, what a great concept. The General Assembly passes tax increases and then prohibits those companies from passing it through to our businesses and ultimately our customers. Maybe we should include big tobacco as well and make Philip Morris pay the increases of this bill's tobacco tax. Unfortunately, it's irrelevant. If we don't sustain this veto, we've put the cart before the horse. We don't know if that bill will pass. We don't know what it will look like if it passes. And certainly don't know if it's legal or not. So this corrected bill, while an admission that the bill we're currently discussing would hurt small businesses, is no more likely than just a distraction. My colleagues, I ask you, let's for once, just one time, let's be kind to Maryland businesses. Let's tell our job creators, the ones that employ our neighbors, that sponsor our Little League teams, support our volunteer fire companies, and give to our community organizations. Let's tell them that they matter. Let's tell them we appreciate them, that we respect them, that they mean more to us than just being sources of revenue for our uncontrolled spending habits. Let's change course, and for once, let's simply do no harm. No more taxes. Not today, not during this pandemic, not during this time of economic turmoil. Let's instead support our businesses, support this veto. I urge you to vote red and vote for Maryland's small businesses. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I thank my colleague for his raising the questions that he has, because they're important questions. Let me start by saying that I think all of us, thank you very much, Senator, all of us understand the pain that this COVID crisis has caused our families and our small businesses. And we passed the package last week with much more aid for our small businesses. I'm hoping more is coming from the federal government, and I think it is. So I think the idea that we care about our small businesses, we want to help our small businesses, I think is proven by the record of this General Assembly, by the record of this governor, and frankly by the record of the Congress and the previous president and the current president of the United States. So I join in that embrace of our small businesses. And they have suffered tremendously during this pandemic. But I got good news. Not everybody has suffered during this pandemic. Facebook, for example, their revenue is up 57% during the pandemic. Google, their revenue is up 84% during the pandemic. Yes, there have been a lot of losers, too many losers, but there have been a few big winners. That's who this bill addresses, the handful of big tech winners. So when someone says, or if the thought occurs to you, we couldn't possibly do this during the pandemic in the middle of COVID, it's more important now than ever. Because we need to make sure that the folks who've suffered during this pandemic get the kind of help companies that they start paying their fair share. Now, my colleague says we'll be the first in the country to pass this specific tax. What he didn't say is that most of the countries in the world and many states across the country are dealing with exactly the same issue. France has a tax like this, Austria has a tax like this, New York State, Indiana, West Virginia are all looking at exactly this issue because these big tech companies are dodging taxes all over the world. All over the world. It's a worldwide problem. We can't solve all the problems in the world, but we can solve the problems in Maryland. We can make sure if big tech doesn't pay its fair share in West Virginia or doesn't pay its fair share in India, at least big tech will pay its fair share in Maryland. That is our responsibility. That is our responsibility. The other issues that the senator raised, Yes. Will somebody file a lawsuit? Absolutely. This is America. This is America. People file a lawsuit when they have breakfast. But as we saw, frankly, last fall, there was a lot of controversy over lawsuits that were filed over the election results. You remember all those lawsuits over the election results? And the courts resolved them quickly and honestly. Cases went to the Supreme Court quickly, and the court system of the United States stood up for our constitutional system and stood up for fairness. I have a high level of confidence that the court system of the United States will make the right decision in evaluating this case. But yes, they'll go to court. That's fine. That's their right. On the issue of the bill that the president has introduced to assure that these big tech companies can't do what people are concerned about, which is to pass on this tax, I say, God bless. Support the bill. If you don't want it passed on, support the bill to say it cannot be passed on. Now, I don't think it's going to be passed on anyway, because the fact of the matter is these big tech companies are charging whatever they can charge right now. They're not holding their prices down to the small businesses until we pass this. The market controls the price. If you believe in the marketplace, what the market says is the price. The issue here is that, yes, this money will go help support improving our schools. We override the governor's veto on the blueprint because we want to make a long-term investment in our kids. We want to modernize our education system for the 21st century. And what this bill does, this provision of this bill in particular says, we have to pay for it. There is no free lunch. As the chairman said, the reason we're in the good situation we are in funding the Quorum plan is because we've thought ahead. This is part of thinking ahead. If we don't modernize our tax system, if we don't make sure that the new winners in the new economy pay taxes just like every small business on Main Street in Maryland, we're going to be in deep trouble. So with that, I believe overriding this veto goes hand in hand with the investment in education and making sure that our small businesses are not the only ones paying their fair share of taxes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from 34th District.
Thanks, President. Before we maybe would yield for a couple quick questions based upon what you just said. I'd really like some clarification.
Senator,
Thank you.
Senator,
I know it's like
for quick questions, Senator. Quick questions, please.
So we have sort of two pieces here. It's the tax on the digital advertising, and then there's the piece of it that says that the advertisers cannot pass the tax back on to the consumer, right?
Not quite. The bill before us is making sure that big tech has to pay some tax. There's a separate bill the president has introduced to, once we override this, to make clear that they can't pass it on.
But they're not in any way connected. Those two bills are not connected, are they? How's that work?
They're conceptually connected.
I mean,
I
understand they reinforce each other, but they're not technically. There's no connection between them, and a technical.
No, absolutely not.
So, if the bill that precludes them from passing it on is not constitutional, then the full burden of this will fall on our small businesses.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. As I said, these big tech companies are charging the highest prices they can right now. They do not have the economic power to raise their prices because they have to pay some taxes.
I'm sorry. I thought the conclusion would be these guys have a whole lot of power and they will absolutely make you.
Well, I'm happy to have an offline conversation about economic theory with you, Senator, but in a marketplace, sellers try to get as high a price as they can. So the prices they are charging now are the highest prices they can. Therefore, and that's why the companies are against it. The reason the big companies are fighting this so hard, the reason they paid all that money for these misleading ads is because they know they're going to pay it. They wouldn't be fighting it so hard if they thought somebody else would pay it.
So you think that they'll just eat the tax?
Yes, sir.
And so they have to go through the trouble of determining the tax. They have to trace the tax back to me and say somehow they have to figure out that the tax applies to me, right?
Who is me? Are you Facebook?
The tech company, the Google of the world.
Yeah, they know where they do business. They're data experts.
Okay, but they're charging me in Maryland. They know there's a Maryland.
No, they're not
tax
charging you. They have to pay a tax on their business in Maryland.
In Maryland.
They'll be determined by an apportionment factor like all our other multi-state taxes under rules put down by the controller.
Right, but and so are they paying tax to Maryland on business for Detroit or?
No.
Well, okay, just
No.
to Maryland.
It's a portion, it's a share in Maryland. That's the way we do it with railroads, that's the way we do it with utility companies, it's the way we do it
you're
with
saying
all
that they
kinds of
then
companies.
wouldn't have the ability to then charge me, since I am a Maryland resident, they wouldn't have the ability to just simply raise my rate, my advertising rate? to
My
cover
view
that
is
tax?
no, because they're already charging you as much as they can.
Well, I'm not sure where else I would go. I mean, if I didn't advertise with Google through their service, how else would I do that? I mean, what's my choice?
Well, that's a whole other issue that the U.S. Justice Department has undertaken, which is the monopoly power of these companies. We should work on that too, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Chair recognizes the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been down here a few years, and this is probably one of the most unbelievable situations I've been in. We've got a pandemic going on outside these doors. People are hurting, they're struggling, they want COVID relief. And what are we debating in here today? Is this on the top 10 list of people who are hurting during COVID? We are debating increasing taxes during a pandemic. This is our priority, that we debate whether we should increase taxes or not. And it sounds like it might go. And that'd be quite a feather in your hat that we increase taxes during a pandemic. But there are some smart people at these big companies. And this argument is trying to be framed that we're going after these big people, not the little guy. We're going to tax the big, bad Facebook and Google or whoever it is. And they're going to absorb all this money, and you're not going to be affected at all. When in fact we know that smart people in business make smart decisions. And they will figure out how to get that tax down to our small businesses who are struggling in a pandemic. And we are going to put this on, what's this go in effect, 30 days after we veto it? We've got to rush this out. We don't even have to pass this until April. But it was the priority of this body, before all the issues we're dealing with COVID, rush this out to the floor because raising taxes is so important to Marylanders that we want to make this one of the first priorities of getting out of the Senate. I think we are disconnected with the average person in Maryland, or at least some of us are. And then we talk about this bill that just came in recently that's going to say you can't directly pass this tax on, kind of deflect the argument. I don't know if any of you know, but there is such a thing called as indirect. That bill doesn't say you can do it indirectly, just don't do it directly. And then it gets down to our small businesses who are struggling. And they have a choice. They can either absorb it and be less competitive with other businesses. All the states around us don't have this. Or they can say, you know what, we'll go out of business because of the pressures of COVID and then this piling on it. But we're really going to try. So instead of eating the cost ourselves, we're going to send it out to the customers. The average day Marylander will feel these taxes. And that's why we're here today. Should average day Marylanders and small businesses get extra taxes during a pandemic? That's obviously the priority of this body. We didn't have to take it up now. We could take it up a week from now, a month from now. We could delay it till next year when the pandemic's over. We on this side say people are tired of being taxed, but they're especially tired of being taxed during a pandemic when they're struggling so hard. We should vote against this and sustain the governor's veto. Thank you.
All right, question before the body is, shall the bill pass notwithstanding the objections of the chief executive? A green vote will override the governor's veto. A red vote will sustain. Any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? Chair recognizes Senator from District 6, 2 minutes to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, it's been great debate today, it really has been. We've talked about a lot of good things, but it troubles me. And this is what really troubles me. We know, as has been stated, how troubling it is outside today just for our businesses. And I think about right now, the mom and pop shops that have closed and that will never be open again because of the pressures from COVID. And I think about those right now that are the verge of closing up because of the pandemic. And I think now, even more so, those businesses with something like this coming, that's going to close or going to leave the state of Maryland and going to go outside the state because of this burden. We really, really have to believe in what we're doing is right. And I believe this is something that we need to hold back, because burdening down more of our businesses, whether they're mom and pop shops, whether they're small or big, they need our help right now. And helping them is supporting them and giving them tax credits and not burdens, grants, giving them things that help them out. But this is not something that's helping them. I believe with all my heart, the right thing to do is to go red and support our governor. And that's why I'm doing that, and that's why I'm explaining my vote. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from District 5, 2 minutes to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. I spoke a minute ago, I know, on this bill already, and I spoke about the tobacco and vape tax side of it. I just want to very quickly, in explaining my red vote in supporting the governor's veto, and really plead with my colleagues. The vice chair of Budget and Tax spoke about trying to get at the big, very successful tech companies who are doing very well during the pandemic, and he's right, they are. And I don't necessarily carry any brief for them, although I do think, I'm not sure where we got the idea in this country we want to punish success, but I do understand the point of they're doing really well. But you know why they're doing well in the pandemic? Partly, it's because for small businesses fighting to survive, the lifeblood of a small business, depending on the type of service it is, the type of business it is lead generation. It's finding new customers or getting repeat customers to come back. And some of this social media advertising and Google advertising, and that is the gold standard, because it can be very targeted to metrics to show you that you're generating a certain number of hits and a certain number of leads that you can go chase to try to help keep your business alive, whatever that business might happen to be. So the idea that they won't find a way, that they won't pass on this cost to the consumer, they absolutely will. A few years ago, Google wouldn't let us do political advertising in Maryland and Washington State because of laws that we passed. So they're very responsive. They can figure it out. So this vote here is an anti-small business vote. You may not feel that way. You may feel strongly we've got to go after these big corporations and we need to fund education. But this will hurt small business. No, just don't make any mistake about it. You're not. Facebook will be fine. The small businesses will be hurt.
Thank you, Senator. All right, if there are no further explanations of the vote, the clerk will take the call. With 29 votes in the affirmative, House Bill 732 shall pass, notwithstanding the objections of the Chief Executive. All right, Senators, we've gone through a lot. We've hit our... Oh, sorry, excuse me, please. Madam Clerk, please read the message.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House of Delegates, the Senate of Maryland has voted to override the governor's veto of House Bill 732, 2020. Said bill is returned to the House herewith, having been enacted under Article 2, Section 17 of the Constitution of Maryland by order Nicole M. Alexander.
Message having been read is adopted. Okay, so we have one left. We have one last message that we're going to do in an hour. We need to clear out the chamber. We are going to secure the chamber, so please, members will not be able to access it, but we will be securing it because we need to do a quick air cycle and do a quick cleaning. We will be hopefully back an hour from now. So the plan is an hour from now. So where are we? We would say we'll say 3:45-ish, 3:45. Okay. All right. Let's do any quick announcements. Any announcements, Chair of Finance Committee?
We won't be meeting further today.
Chair of Educational and Environmental Affairs?
Yeah, Mr. President, depending on how long our afternoon session is, we may have a voting session afterwards, but we will not meet between the two sessions.
Judicial proceedings?
Thank you, Mr. President. We will meet for a voting session at the conclusion of our second session for the day.
Excellent. Okay. Any other announcements for between now and then? If not, let's do. Oh, yes, Chair of Capital.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to alert the members that there are 17 of you who have not picked up your LBI packets at DLS.
Senators, please
so in between session, go down to DLS. I can't give the names. They don't give the names, just like they don't for the bills. But there's 17 of you who haven't picked up their green packets. And remember, once you get your green packets, you got to sign the top, return 4 of them to the Secretary of Senate's office, drop it in the hopper, and then you get an email. Then you have to send that email to your organization so they can fill out the fact sheet, and that's how we determine the LBIs. So if we don't have a fact sheet, we can't determine the LBI. So thank you, Mr. President. If we could just have drop by, that would be great.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for making that announcement. Any further announcements for the next hour? Let's do a quick quorum call. Please call the roll.
Mr. President.
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 46 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, Senate of Maryland remains in session. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the Senate of Maryland stand in recess until 3:45.
Without objection, so ordered.